At my own son's backyard barbecue, a party I set up, myself, paid for myself, I accidentally bumped into my son while carrying a tray of drinks. He spun around and struck me across the face, in front of 30 people. Then his wife crossed the yard and said quietly, "You startled him. Apologize or leave our home." So I left. I walked out through a gate I built with my own hands, got in my truck, and made one phone call. By the time they drove home that evening, 3 strangers were already waiting at their front door. Before we begin, thank you for being here. This channel, Dad's Revenge Stories, exists because of people like you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your city. I read every one. This story contains fictional elements for reflection and entertainment. Any similarity to real names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is one we all need. I have built things with my hands my entire life. Concrete foundations, wooden frames, rooftops that could hold 40 years of California rain. I spent 31 years running a small contracting company out of Pasadena, and I learned early on that the most important part of any structure was never the part people could see. It was always what sat underneath. The part nobody thought to check until something started cracking. I thought about that a lot on the afternoon everything fell apart. It was a Saturday in September, one of those warm Pasadena days where the sky goes so blue it almost hurts to look at. My son Colin and his wife Diane had set up the backyard with folding tables and paper plates, strings of lights along the fence, and a gas grill going full heat near the far wall. Cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas were standing around with plastic cups. My grandnephews were chasing each other through the grass. Somebody had put on music, something low and easy, that floated above the conversation without getting in the way. I had arrived that morning before anyone else. Diane had sent me a text 3 days earlier. "Dad, we're a little short this month. Could you grab some decorations and maybe the drinks?" I didn't answer right away. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and read it twice. Then I put it in my pocket and drove to the party supply store on Lake Avenue the next morning. I bought the paper streamers. I bought the plastic tablecloths in red and white. I bought 4 cases of lemonade and 2 bags of ice. I loaded everything into the back of my truck and drove it over to the house on Marengo Avenue. The house where I had lived for 22 years. The house where Colin and Diane had been living for the past 3. I had just set the last tray of cups on the folding table near the grill when Pete Garza leaned over the fence from next door and gave me a wave. "You need a hand with anything, Ray?" he called out. Pete was 71, retired, had lived beside that house longer than I had. He knew me better than most people in that neighborhood, which meant he knew when to offer and when to stay out of the way. "I think I got it, Pete," I told him. "But thank you." He nodded slowly, the way a man does when he's saying more than his words are. Then he went back to his garden. I noticed the invitation by accident. It was sitting on the end of the table near the cooler face, up printed on cream cardstock. Diane had designed it herself, I could tell by the font she always used on everything. At the top it read in neat black letters, "A Calloway Family Gathering," hosted by Colin and Diane Calloway. I picked it up. I read it once. I turned it over to see if there was anything printed on the back. There wasn't. My name was not on it. I stood there for a moment with that card in my hand, in the backyard of the house I had built my life inside, listening to the sound of my family arriving around me. Then I folded the card once and put it in the breast pocket of my shirt. I went back to arranging cups. By 2 o'clock, the yard was full. Colin was working the grill, laughing loud the way he always did, in a crowd his voice carrying over everyone else's. He was 38 years old, and he had his mother's eyes and my jaw, and absolutely nothing else I could point to and call familiar anymore. Diane moved between the guests with a pitcher of lemonade, smiling at everyone, making sure to touch an arm. Here, lean in close, there. The kind of performance I had watched her give at every family gathering for the past 6 years. I was carrying a second tray of drinks out from the kitchen when it happened. The back door swung behind me. The tray was wide loaded with cups. I came around the corner of the porch, and Colin was there, standing closer than I expected, turned away and talking to somebody over his shoulder. I stepped to the side to avoid him, but the edge of the tray caught his arm. He spun around. I saw his face before I felt anything. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes had gone somewhere dark and flat, the way a man looks when he has been sitting on something ugly all day and has been waiting without knowing it for somewhere to put it. I found out later from Nathan that Colin had received a phone call that morning. A business partner had pulled out of a deal that Colin had been counting on for months. $300,000 gone before lunch. I did not know any of that yet. All I knew was that the tray tilted, 2 cups slid off, and then his right hand came across and struck me across the face. The sound was sharp and flat at the same time, like a board snapping. The cups hit the patio stones. Lemonade spread across the concrete and soaked into my shoes. The yard went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when the music stops. The kind that happens when 30 people all pull their breath in at the same moment and hold it. I heard the grill hissing. I heard a child somewhere behind me take 2 running steps and then stop. I pressed 2 fingers to the side of my face. The skin burned in a straight line from my cheekbone down toward my jaw. I looked at my son. Colin's chest was rising and falling fast. His hand was still raised slightly, like he hadn't told it to come down yet. He stared at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between fury and the first dim recognition that he had just done something he could not take back. "Watch where you're going," he said. His voice was lower now, almost quiet, like the anger had gotten what it needed and was retreating. I did not answer him. I looked out across the yard instead, at the cousins with their plastic cups frozen halfway to their mouths, at my nephew standing near the fence with his eyes cast down at the ground, at Aunt Sarah, who was 63 years old and had known me since before Colin was born, standing perfectly still with her arms crossed and her lips pressed together. At the far corner of the porch, I caught a glimpse of my younger son, Nathan. He was 29 years old, and he was standing very still with his phone in his hand, pointed in our direction. Nobody moved. Diane set her pitcher down on the nearest table. She walked across the yard, her sandals clicking against the patio stones, and she stopped beside her husband. She put her hand on Colin's arm and looked at me. And that was the moment I understood that whatever happened next was going to be entirely up to me. Diane had a way of speaking that made everything sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. She used a particular tone for moments like this, measured and low, the kind of voice you use when you want to appear calm, while making sure everyone around you understands that the problem is not you. I had heard that tone at Thanksgiving dinners. I had heard it when she called to explain why they couldn't make it to Margaret's hospital appointments. I knew exactly what was coming before she opened her mouth. "Dad." She said it gently, almost kindly, like she was doing me a favor. "I think you owe Colin an apology." The yard was still quiet. 30 people, and not one of them made a sound. I could hear the gas grill cycling behind me, the low mechanical hiss of it, and somewhere past the fence a neighbor's sprinklers had kicked on. The ordinary sounds of a Saturday afternoon in Pasadena, carrying on like nothing had happened. I pressed my fingers against my cheekbone. The skin there felt swollen, already tight, and hot, like something underneath was pushing out. I lowered my hand and looked at Diane. "He struck me," I said. "You bumped into him," she replied. Her voice didn't change at all. "You startled him. You know how he gets when he's stressed." I looked at Colin. He was standing slightly behind Diane now, his arms crossed over his chest, his chin lifted. There was something in his posture that I recognized, and it took me a moment to place it. It was the posture of a man who had done something he knew was wrong, and had already decided he wasn't going to be the one to say so. He was waiting for the room to agree with him. He had been waiting for rooms to agree with him his entire adult life. "Apologize," Diane said again, "or I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I turned and looked at the yard. Aunt Sarah was standing near the far table. She was 63 years old, Margaret's younger sister, and she had been at every family gathering I could remember for the past 4 decades. She was looking at me with an expression that sat somewhere between grief and guilt. Her mouth opened slightly. Then she looked down at the grass. My nephew Marcus was examining the label on his cup, like it contained information he urgently needed. 2 of the younger cousins had drifted toward the back fence, putting distance between themselves and what was happening without technically leaving. A woman I barely recognized, some connection of Diane's from her work, was staring at her phone with theatrical concentration. Nathan was still at the corner of the porch. He had lowered the phone, but his hand was still wrapped around it, knuckles pale. He caught my eye for just a second. The look on his face was 29 years of knowing his father condensed into a single expression. He gave me the smallest nod I had ever seen from another human being. I thought about a morning almost a year earlier. I had pulled into the driveway on Marengo Avenue to drop off a casserole Margaret had made for Colin and Diane during a week they said was particularly hard. I had parked in the spot closest to the side gate, the one I had always used, the one I had used for 22 years, living in that house. Colin had come outside carrying a bag of trash and stopped when he saw my truck. "That's my spot," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough for Pete Garza, who was trimming his hedge 10 feet away, to stop trimming. "I've told you before, Dad. Basic courtesy." I had moved the truck. I had carried the casserole to the door. I had driven home telling myself it wasn't worth the argument. Standing in that yard, with my face still burning, I understood something I should have understood then. Giving ground to a man like Colin didn't buy peace. It bought him confidence. Every time I stepped back, he took 2 steps forward. And somewhere along the way, the people around us had started measuring the distance between us and deciding I was the one who had moved. I was 68 years old. I had poured concrete in 100-degree heat. I had buried my wife. I had written checks to cover debts my son was too proud to admit he had made. I had driven my mother to chemotherapy 11 times in the last year of her life, while Colin sent flowers and apologies from cities he may or may not have actually been in. I was done moving. "No," I said. It came out quieter than I intended, but it landed the way I meant it to. Clean and flat and final, like a level reading 0. Diane's eyes hardened. "Then I need you to go, Dad. I'm sorry." She didn't sound sorry. I picked up 2 of the fallen cups from the patio stones. I set them on the nearest table. I took one long look around the yard at the decorations I had purchased, at the tablecloths I had spread, at the lemonade pooling between the cracks in the concrete. Then I walked toward the side gate, the same gate I had installed myself in the summer of 2003, and I pushed it open. Behind me, Colin said something to Diane in a low voice. She laughed once, short and quiet. I didn't look back. The gate swung shut behind me with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I walked to my truck. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the particular kind of tension that builds in a man when he has been holding himself completely still for too long. I sat behind the wheel and stared through the windshield at the empty street. My phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 1 missed call. Gerald Vance, attorney at law. I didn't answer the call. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and pulled away from the curb. Gerald Vance had been Margaret's attorney for 11 years. He was a careful man who did not call without a reason, and whatever his reason was, I was not ready to hear it yet. I needed 10 minutes first, maybe 20. I drove north on Marengo Avenue without thinking about where I was going. The late afternoon sun was low and flat, cutting through the windshield at an angle that made me squint. I flipped the visor down. The street slid past the same bungalows and jacaranda trees I had driven past 1,000 times, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized I was holding tight. Margaret used to say that a long drive was cheaper than a therapist, and worked about as well. I missed her so completely in that moment that my throat closed around the thought of her name. She had been gone for 8 months. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in October, gone by January. 4 months from the first scan to the funeral, and I had been beside her for every single day of it. I had learned to read the machine beside her hospital bed. I had learned which nurses worked which shifts and which ones would stop to answer questions and which ones would not. I had driven her to 31 medical appointments over the course of her illness, and I know the exact number because I kept a notebook in the glove compartment of this same truck, writing down dates and dosages and the names of medications I had never heard of before and hoped never to hear again. Colin had visited 4 times. He sent flowers twice, called on her birthday, and attended the funeral in a dark suit that still had the dry cleaning tag tucked inside the collar. I noticed it during the service and didn't say anything. Margaret would have noticed it too, and laughed about it later quietly, just between the two of us. That was the kind of thing we did. We noticed things together. I stopped at a red light on Colorado Boulevard and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The mark on my cheek had darkened. It was no longer just heat and pressure. It was the beginning of a bruise, the kind that would go purple by morning and take 2 weeks to fade completely. I was 68 years old, and my son had put a bruise on my face in front of 30 people, and not one of them had said a word about it directly to him. Not one. The light changed. I drove. I found myself thinking about a conversation I'd had with Margaret about 2 months before she passed. It was a Tuesday evening, and she was having a better day than most, sitting up in bed with the reading lamp on, more alert than she had been in weeks. I had brought her soup from the Vietnamese place on Walnut Street that she liked, even though by then she could only manage a few spoonfuls. She watched me set the container on her tray and said without any preamble at all, "Colin took $4,000 from my savings account in August." I put down the spoon I was holding. "I know," she said before I could speak. "I've known for a while. I didn't want to upset you." She looked at her hands resting on the blanket. "He told me it was a short-term loan. He said he'd put it back before I noticed." She paused. "He didn't put it back." "Margaret," I started. "I'm not telling you because I want you to confront him," she said. Her voice was tired, but her eyes were steady. She had always had steady eyes, even at the end. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand something about why I've been making certain arrangements." I asked her what arrangements. She reached over to the nightstand and took my hand in both of hers. Her fingers were thinner than they had ever been. "I've been talking to Gerald," she said. "There are things I want to make sure are handled correctly, before I can't handle them anymore." I turned off Colorado onto a quieter street and let the truck slow down. Outside, a man was walking a golden retriever along the sidewalk. A woman was pulling weeds from her front garden. The ordinary machinery of a Saturday afternoon, people doing the quiet work of their lives. I thought about what Margaret had said next that evening in the hospital room. She had looked at me for a long moment and then said, "I want you to promise me something, Ray. I want you to promise me that when the time comes, you won't let guilt make your decisions for you." Not guilt about Colin, not guilt about the family. Just ask yourself what I would have wanted you to do. I had promised her. I pulled into the driveway of my own small house on Mentor Avenue, the one I had moved into after Margaret and I decided Colin and Diane needed more space. That was 3 years ago. I had told myself it was a practical decision, a generous one. I had told myself a lot of things over the past 3 years. I sat in the driveway with the engine running. Through the windshield, I could see the potted geraniums on my front porch that Margaret had planted the spring before she got sick. I watered them every other day because she would have wanted me to. The phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Gerald Vance, attorney at law. This time I picked it up. Mr. Calloway? Gerald Vance's voice was exactly as I remembered it. Low and deliberate, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years choosing his words carefully before he let them out into the world. I've been trying to reach you. I know, I said. I wasn't ready to talk yet. There was a brief pause on the line, not uncomfortable. Gerald was not a man who filled silence with noise. Are you ready now? I looked through the windshield at the geraniums on my porch. The late sun was catching the red petals and turning them almost orange. Margaret had chosen that particular variety because she said they were hard to kill. She had been right about that too. Tell me what you need to tell me, I said. Gerald had been Margaret's attorney since 2012. She had found him through a colleague at the school where she volunteered, and she had come home that first evening and told me he was the most thorough man she had ever met. Coming from Margaret, that was not a small thing. She was thorough herself. She did not say it lightly. I want to start by asking you a direct question, Gerald said. Did something happen today at the family gathering? I touched the side of my face with 2 fingers. The bruise had settled in properly now, a dull, deep ache that ran from my cheekbone down toward my jaw. Yes, I said. Something happened. Can you describe it briefly? My son struck me across the face, in front of approximately 30 people, at a gathering held in the home on Marengo Avenue. Another pause. When Gerald spoke again, his voice had not changed in tone, but there was something underneath it that had shifted slightly. Mr. Calloway, I need you to understand the significance of what you've just told me. Are you somewhere private? I'm in my truck. That's fine. I heard the faint sound of papers moving. As you know, when Mrs. Calloway completed the transfer of the Marengo Avenue property into your name 8 months ago, she did so through a properly recorded grant deed with the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office. The deed established you as the sole legal owner of that property. Colin and Diane Calloway have no ownership interest. None whatsoever. I know that, I said. What they have, Gerald continued, is what we call a license to occupy, not a lease, not a rental agreement. They pay no rent, they hold no tenancy rights, and they reside in that home solely because you, as the owner, granted them permission to do so. That distinction matters enormously under California law. I watched a mockingbird land on my porch railing and tilt its head at the geraniums. Go on, I said. Mrs. Calloway was very specific when she drafted the occupancy terms. She included a protection clause. If either occupant engaged in harassment, intimidation, or any act of physical violence directed toward you, the license to occupy would terminate immediately. Not after a court process. Not after a waiting period. Immediately, because they are licensees and not tenants, and California law treats those 2 situations very differently. She never told me exactly what the clause said. I told him. She told me it existed. She said she hoped I would never need to know the details. That sounds like her, Gerald said quietly. It did. It sounded exactly like her. She had always protected me from the weight of things she thought I would carry too heavily if I knew them too soon. "There is one more thing I need to tell you," Gerald said, "and I want you to hear it clearly." He paused. "You signed the occupancy agreement as well, Mr. Calloway. You were present when it was drafted. You added your signature alongside Mrs. Calloway's because you wanted Colin and Diane to have a genuine opportunity. You told me at the time that you hoped the clause would never need to be invoked, that you were giving your son a chance to prove he had changed." My hand tightened around the phone. I remembered that afternoon in Gerald's office on South Lake Avenue. Margaret had been tired that day, more tired than usual, but she had sat straight in her chair and spoken clearly. I had signed my name beneath hers on the last page and told myself I was doing the right thing, that a man should give his son every possible chance before closing a door. "I also need to inform you," Gerald continued, "that I received a video file approximately 40 minutes ago. It was sent from a number registered to a Nathan Calloway. The footage clearly documents the incident that occurred this afternoon." Nathan. My younger son standing in the corner of that porch with his phone in his hand. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Mr. Calloway." Gerald's voice was steady and careful. "Given the physical assault documented on video, Mr. Calloway, we are not just dealing with property law. I am fast-tracking an emergency protective order through the local court right now. Under California law, this violence immediately revokes their license to occupy. Combined with the court order, the Pasadena police will meet my team at the property to serve the eviction notice and ensure they vacate immediately for your safety. We don't need a lengthy court process. We have the law and the police on our side tonight." The mockingbird on my porch railing opened its wings and was gone. I thought about Margaret's hands wrapped around mine in that hospital room. I thought about what she had asked me to promise her. I thought about the card in my breast pocket that said Colin and Diane Calloway hosts in careful black letters. "Move forward." "Gerald," I said, "do what Margaret asked you to do." A brief silence. Then, "I'll have the team there within the hour, Mr. Calloway. They'll arrive before Colin and Diane return from the gathering." The call ended. I sat in the driveway and did not move for a long time. The sun was dropping behind the rooftops to the west. The geraniums had gone dark in the shadow of the porch. Somewhere across town at a house on Marengo Avenue that had my name on the deed, a door was about to close. I went inside and didn't turn on the lights. I sat down in the armchair by the front window, the one Margaret had reupholstered in dark green fabric the year before we moved out of Marengo Avenue, and I let the room go dim around me. Outside, the street was doing what streets in Pasadena do on Saturday evenings, filling up with the quiet sounds of people finishing their days. A car pulling into a driveway. Someone calling a dog in from the yard. A lawnmower 2 houses down cutting its last strip before dark. I had a photograph on the shelf across from me. Colin, at maybe 7 years old, standing in the backyard on Marengo Avenue, in a Little League uniform, holding a bat that was clearly too big for him. He was grinning so wide his eyes had almost closed. I was standing beside him with my hand on his shoulder, and I was laughing at something he had just said. I didn't remember what it was anymore. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I thought about the year I spent in that same backyard with his son. Jordan had been born in March, and by June Diane had called to ask if I could come stay for a while. "Just until we get our footing," she said. "Colin's new position has crazy hours, and I can't manage everything alone." I told her I would be there Monday morning. I moved into the guest room on Marengo Avenue and stayed for 11 months. I fed Jordan his 6 o'clock bottle while Colin and Diane slept. I learned which brand of formula he preferred and which one gave him trouble, and I bought the right one every week without being asked. I sat on the kitchen floor with him on a playmat and stacked wooden blocks and knocked them down and stacked them again 50 times, 100 times, because he laughed every single time they fell, and that laugh was the best sound I had heard in years. I took him to the park on Chester Avenue on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I knew every duck in that pond by its markings. What I did not know until much later was that Diane had installed 2 cameras in the living room and the play area during my second week there. I found out from Nathan, who found out from a cousin Diane had mentioned it to at a different gathering years after the fact. The cameras had been positioned to capture the main areas where I spent time with Jordan. Diane had reviewed the footage regularly. Nathan told me she had once mentioned to this cousin that she was looking for something she could use if she ever needed it. I sat in my dark living room and turned that information over in my mind, the way you turn a stone over in your hand, looking at the underside. She had watched me raise her son for 11 months. She had watched me change him and feed him and teach him to clap his hands and say the word more when he wanted another cracker. She had watched all of it looking for a mistake, and she had not found one because there was nothing to find. I had loved that boy the way I had loved Colin at that age, without condition and without calculation. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out. Nathan. Dad. His voice was tight. Are you okay? Where are you? Home, I said. I'm fine. You're not fine. Nobody who just went through that is fine. I heard him exhale hard. I want you to know something. I need you to know it right now. I filmed everything, from the moment Colin turned around. I got all of it, Dad. I already sent it to Mr. Osei. My chest did something complicated. Pride and grief in the same moment, which is a combination I had not expected. Why were you filming? I asked him. Nathan was quiet for a second. Because I've watched Colin treat you like that for 3 years, and nobody ever does anything about it. I decided a long time ago that if it ever went too far, I wasn't going to be another person who just stood there. His voice cracked slightly at the end. I should have done something today instead of just filming. I've been thinking about that since you walked out that gate. You did the right thing, I told him. I should have said something. Nathan, I kept my voice level. What you did may matter more than anything anyone said today. Do you understand me? He didn't answer right away. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. I thought about another afternoon, about 2 years after the year I spent watching Jordan. Colin had called me on a Wednesday evening with a particular quality in his voice that I had learned to recognize over the years, the low, careful tone he used when he needed something and was working up to asking for it. Dad, I'm in a tight spot, he said. The utility company is about to cut the power and the gas on the same day. It's a billing error. I just need a few weeks to sort it out. I had known it was not a billing error. I had known because Melissa Tanner, who had run the books at my contracting company for 14 years before I sold it, had mentioned 3 months earlier that she had run into Colin at a sports bar off the 110 freeway, and that he had been there for a long time, and that there had been money on the table that had nothing to do with food or drinks. The 2 overdue bills totaled $6,400. I called Melissa the next morning and asked her to wire the payment from my personal savings account. Ray, are you sure? She said. This is your retirement money. I told her to process it. Colin never knew how close he had come to having the lights turned off. He also never knew I was the one who made sure they stayed on. Dad, Nathan said on the phone. Are you still there? I'm here, I said. Come over tomorrow morning. I'll make coffee. After we hung up, I sat for another few minutes in the dark. The photograph of Colin in his little league uniform caught the last light from the window. That boy with the bat too big for his hands, grinning at something I had already forgotten. I wondered when exactly the distance between that boy and the man in the backyard this afternoon had become impossible to cross. I got up eventually and went to the kitchen. I filled the percolator and set it on the burner, the way Margaret had taught me the old-fashioned way, because she never trusted drip machines to get the temperature right. The kitchen smelled like coffee and dish soap and the faint trace of the lavender she used to keep in a small jar on the windowsill. I had replaced the jar twice since January because I couldn't bring myself to stop. I stood at the counter and watched the percolator and thought about the last real conversation Margaret and I had about Colin. It was a Sunday afternoon in November, about 6 weeks before she passed. Father Dennis Corley had come by the house to sit with her for a while, the way he did most Sundays toward the end. Father Dennis had been the pastor at St. Andrew's on El Molino Avenue for over 20 years, and he and Margaret had developed the kind of friendship that forms between two people who have been sitting in the same room talking about serious things for a long time. He was 70 years old, and he moved slowly, and he never said anything he didn't mean. After he left that afternoon, Margaret asked me to sit beside her on the bed. "I need to tell you what Gerald and I have been working on," she said. Her breathing had become more deliberate by then, each breath a small act of concentration. "I want you to understand it completely before I can't explain it anymore." I told her I was listening. She had transferred the deed to the Marengo Avenue property into my name 3 weeks earlier. Gerald had handled the paperwork, filed it with the county, made sure every signature was witnessed, and every document was properly recorded. As far as the law was concerned, that house had been mine since the first week of November. Colin and Diane had been living in my house without knowing it. "I drew up an occupancy agreement," Margaret said. "Gerald helped me structure it correctly. Colin and Diane can stay in the home for as long as they choose, rent-free, as long as certain conditions are met." She looked at me steadily. "I am not punishing Colin. I want you to understand that. I am protecting you. There is a difference." I told her I understood. "The condition that matters most," she continued, "is the one about how they treat you. I told Gerald to write it clearly. If Colin or Diane ever lift a hand against you or try to intimidate you in that house, their right to stay there ends on that very second. No courts, no arguments. The police will remove them. Gerald knows exactly what to do." I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner. She reached over and straightened the collar of my shirt, the way she had done 10,000 times across 41 years of marriage. "Because you would have argued with me," she said. "You would have told me it wasn't necessary. You would have found 12 reasons why Colin deserved more chances." She let her hand rest against my chest for a moment. "You're a good man, Ray. Sometimes good men need someone to build a floor under them before they fall through." I poured the coffee and carried it to the kitchen table. The night had come down fully outside the window. The street was quiet. I wrapped both hands around the mug and thought about the afternoon almost a year ago, the parking spot incident. I had pulled into the driveway on Marengo Avenue, and Colin had come outside and announced to Pete Garza and 2 cousins who were visiting that I apparently still hadn't figured out basic courtesy after 67 years. I had moved the truck. Standing in the kitchen tonight, I finally understood what I had not understood then. Colin had not been angry about the parking spot. He had never cared about the parking spot. What he had been doing in front of Pete and those cousins was making a declaration. He was telling everyone present that this was his house now, that the rules here were his rules, that the man who had built the porch they were standing on and planted the trees shading the driveway was a guest here, and guests followed the host's instructions. He had been wrong about every part of that. My phone buzzed on the table. Nathan again. "Dad, I forgot to tell you something. Father Dennis called me this morning before all of this happened. He said he has something for you. Something Mom asked him to hold on to." I set down my mug. "Did he say what it was?" "No, just that she asked him to keep it until he felt the time was right." Nathan paused. "He said today he thinks the time is right." I looked out the dark window at the street. Margaret had always had a sense for timing that I never fully understood. She knew when to speak and when to wait. She knew when a thing needed to happen now and when it needed to happen later. Even from wherever she was now, it seemed she still knew. "I'll call him in the morning," I said. After I hung up, I checked the time. It was 6:23 in the evening. Somewhere on Marengo Avenue, Gerald Vance and his team had been standing at the front door for 17 minutes. Before I take you back to the morning, everything started. Pause here for just a second. If you're still with me, type "still here" in the comments right now. I want to know you're along for this, because what's coming next, what Raymond found on that kitchen counter, what was printed on that invitation card, is going to change everything you think you know about this family. And a gentle note: what follows contains some fictional details woven in to help carry this story forward. If that's not what you came for, no hard feelings, you're free to step away right here. But if you stay, I promise it will be worth it. That morning felt like it belonged to a different week entirely. I had been up before 6, the way I always am. Old habits from 30 years of getting to job sites before the rest of the crew. I made toast and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and then I drove to the party supply store on Lake Avenue because Diane had sent me a text 3 days earlier asking if I could handle the decorations and drinks. She had written, "We're a little short this month, Dad. You know how it gets." I had read it twice and then set my phone face down on the counter for a few minutes before picking it up again and typing back, "I'll take care of it." I always took care of it. The store was quiet at that hour, just me and a teenage kid restocking the balloon display near the entrance. I found the paper streamers without any help and spent longer than I should have standing in the tablecloth aisle deciding between red and white or solid blue. Margaret would have known immediately. She had a gift for that kind of decision, fast and certain the way she approached most things. I chose red and white and told myself she would have agreed. I loaded 4 cases of lemonade into the truck bed, 2 bags of ice, the streamers, the tablecloths, a box of napkins printed with small American flags that seemed festive without being too much. $63.40. I paid cash. When I pulled onto Marengo Avenue just after 8, Pete Garza was already in his front yard, crouched beside his rose beds with a pair of pruning shears. He straightened up when he heard my truck and gave me a wave that had a question in it. "You're here early, Ray," he called across the fence. "Setting up," I told him. He nodded at the truck bed. "You need a hand carrying any of that in?" "I've got it, Pete. But thank you." He watched me unload without saying anything else for a minute. Then he said, "Call and know you're bringing all this bis soon." "Diane asked me to soon," I said. Pete made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He went back to his roses. I carried everything through the side gate and started setting up the backyard alone. I unfolded the tables, shook out the tablecloths, arranged the cups in rows, the way Margaret always did, large ones on the left, small ones on the right. I got the grill going and adjusted the temperature and set out the tongs on the little hook on the side where they always went. It took me about an hour and a half, and nobody came outside to help or to thank me or to say good morning. I was wiping down this last table when I noticed the receipt. I went into the hallway closet to find extra trash bags, and my foot brushed against a discarded bank statement from my late wife's old account, the one Colin claimed he had no access to. There it was, printed just 2 days prior, an unauthorized cash withdrawal of $900 right next to a boutique receipt for a luxury item Diane was hiding upstairs. They weren't short on money. They were just short on boundaries, spending Margaret's legacy while begging me to pay for their paper plates. I stood at the sink and let the water run over my hands and looked at that receipt for what was probably 15 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Then I dried my hands, walked back outside, and finished arranging the cups. By noon, the yard was filling up. Cousins arrived with covered dishes. The kids claimed the grass immediately. Colin appeared from inside the house around 12:30, already holding a soda, moving through the gathering, the way he always did. At these things loudly, and with the particular confidence of a man who believes the room exists for his benefit. I was straightening the napkin stack when Diane's cousin handed me the invitation card. "Cute design, right?" she said. "Diane made them herself." I looked down at the card. Cream paper, black letters, the font Diane used for everything. A Calloway family gathering, hosted by Colin and Diane Calloway. I read it once, then I read it again. I had paid for the tablecloths under my feet. I had carried in the lemonade sweating in the cooler beside me. I had gotten up before 6 in the morning and driven to Lake Avenue and spent $63.40 of my own money so that my son and his wife could host a party with my name nowhere on the invitation. I folded the card once and slid it into the breast pocket of my shirt. Then I looked up and saw Colin coming around the corner of the porch. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far from this backyard and these people. I noticed it, but I didn't know yet what it meant. I would find out later that he had taken a call that morning from a business partner. A deal he had been working on for the better part of a year had collapsed before lunch. He was carrying all of that when he turned the corner and found me standing there with a tray of drinks in my hands. The rest happened in less time than it takes to describe. I have thought about those 30 seconds more times than I can count. Not because I want to, because the mind does what it does, and some moments burn themselves into a man, whether he invites them or not. So I have gone back to that afternoon again and again, the way you press a sore tooth with your tongue, even knowing it will hurt, just to confirm that the pain is still real. Here is what I remember. Colin came around this corner of the porch, moving fast the way he moved when something was eating at him. His shoulders were up near his ears. His jaw was working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. I had seen that posture before, usually right before he said something he would not apologize for later. I was holding the tray with both hands, wide loaded with plastic cups filled to about 3/4. I stepped to my right to give him room. It wasn't enough room. The edge of the tray caught his left forearm. 2 cups slid off the right side and hit the patio stones. The lemonade went in 2 directions at once. I heard the plastic bounce, that hollow sound, and I was already starting to say something, already forming the words. "I'm sorry. Colin, I didn't see you." The kind of reflexive apology I had been making to my son for years, for things that were not my fault. I never got the words out. He was already turning. His right hand came up and across in a single motion, the kind of motion that doesn't have hesitation in it, the kind that comes from somewhere below thinking. The back of his hand connected with the left side of my face at the cheekbone, and the sound it made was dry and sharp like a cabinet door slamming in an empty house. My head turned with the impact. I took 1 step back to keep my balance. The tray was still in my hands. I don't know why I didn't drop it. Maybe because I had spent 68 years not dropping things. Maybe because some part of my body just kept doing what it was doing, regardless of what the rest of me was processing. The yard went quiet in a way I have never experienced before or since. Not gradual, immediate. Like someone had reached over and turned a dial from full volume to nothing in a single movement. The music was still playing from the speaker on the back fence. I could hear it faintly underneath the silence, some song I didn't recognize. The grill was still hissing. A child somewhere behind me had stopped mid-laugh, and the laugh just hung there unfinished. I pressed 2 fingers to my cheekbone. The skin was already hot and tight, the way skin gets in the first seconds before the deeper pain arrives. I have had injuries before. The 30 years in construction will give a man a comprehensive education in physical pain. A broken finger on a job site in '92. a nail through the heel of my boot in '04 that went partway through the foot. I know what my body feels like when something has gone wrong with it. This was different. This was my son's hand on my face. I looked up at Colin. He was breathing hard through his nose. His hand was still raised slightly, elbow bent, like the arm hadn't gotten the message yet that the motion was finished. His eyes were wide in a way that told me the anger had already started draining out of him, replaced by something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. I had watched Colin's face my entire life. I knew every expression it was capable of making. I had never seen that particular one before. "Watch where you're going," he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. I didn't answer him. I looked instead at the yard around me, at my nephew Marcus, who had gone the color of old chalk, at Diane's cousin holding her cup with both hands like she needed something to grip, at two of the younger kids who had stopped running and were standing perfectly still in the grass, the way children do when they understand that the adults around them have entered territory the children don't have maps for yet. At Aunt Sarah standing near the folding table, with her arms wrapped around her own middle, her lips pressed together so hard they had gone white at the edges. Her eyes were on me, and they were full of something that looked like grief, and something that looked like shame, and something that looked underneath both of those like anger. At Nathan. My younger son was standing at the far corner of the porch, back against the wall phone in his right hand, arm angled forward at about chest height. He was very still. His face had gone to a place I recognized, the place it went, when he was holding himself together by concentrating on doing one specific thing very carefully. I understood then what he was doing. I held Colin's gaze for one more second. Then I set the tray down on the nearest table, the lemonade still pooling around my shoes, and I straightened up to my full height. I was 68 years old. I had built things that were still standing. I had buried my wife. I had written the checks and driven the miles and swallowed the indignities and told myself every time that it was worth it, because family was worth it. Colin looked away first. Diane crossed the yard like she owned it, which I understood now she believed she did. That was the thing about Diane. She had been operating under a set of assumptions for 3 years that nobody had ever directly corrected, and uncorrected assumptions have a way of calcifying into certainties. She walked between the folding tables with her shoulders back and her chin level past the cousins and the kids and the cooler I had loaded with ice that morning, and she stopped about 4 feet in front of me. She looked at my face for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. That 1 second told me everything I needed to know about Diane. She had seen the mark. She knew what it was and what had made it. And she had made a decision in that single second to proceed as though she hadn't. "Dad," she said. Her voice was the careful, managed tone she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. "I think this has gotten a little out of hand. Why don't we all just take a breath?" "He struck me, Diane. You startled him." She tilted her head slightly. "You know how stressed he's been. The business situation has been really difficult lately, and he's been under enormous pressure, and I think if we're being honest, the way you came around that corner—" "Diane." I said her name the way you set something heavy down. Not loud, just final. She stopped talking. I looked at her and I thought about the camera she had installed in the living room of this house during the 2nd week I was there taking care of her newborn son. I thought about 11 months of bottles and park visits and wooden blocks, all of it conducted under a lens she had pointed at me while she was looking for something to use. I thought about the receipt on the kitchen counter that morning. $830 for a handbag on the same day she had texted me that they were a little short this month. I thought about the invitation card folded in my breast pocket. Colin had moved to stand beside her, now arms crossed, jaw reset into something approximating composure. The crowd around us was doing that particular thing crowds do when they want to be somewhere else but feel unable to leave small, unconscious movements. Weight, shifting eyes, finding the ground, hands finding pockets. Aunt Sarah had not moved. She was watching me from across the yard with an expression I couldn't fully read, but that contained, I thought, a question. "What are you going to do, Ray?" "I'd like you to apologize to Colin," Diane said. Her voice had hardened slightly, the reasonableness wearing thin at the edges. "We can all move past this and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. That's what I think everyone here wants." I noticed the way she said everyone here, the way her eyes moved briefly across the gathered relatives when she said it. She was reminding me that I was outnumbered. She was reminding me that these people had been standing here for the past 3 years, watching Colin treat me the way he treated me, and not one of them had said a word about it. And that record of silence was something she was counting on continuing. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was what that silence had cost her. Because here is what I understood in that moment, standing in that backyard with lemonade drying on my shoes, and my son's handprint burning into my cheekbone. The house on Marengo Avenue, the house Colin and Diane had been entertaining their guests in all afternoon, the house whose backyard we were currently standing in, had my name on the deed at the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office. It had had my name on it for the past 10 months. Every assumption Diane had built her life around for the past 3 years was resting on a foundation that did not exist. She just didn't know it yet. I reached into my breast pocket and took out the invitation card. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the cardstock between my fingers. Then I set it on the table beside me, face up, so that the words Colin and Diane Calloway hosts were visible to anyone standing close enough to read them. "No," I said. Diane blinked. It was the first unmanaged expression I had seen from her all afternoon. "Excuse me." "No," I said again. Same word. Same weight. "I'm not going to apologize." Colin's face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, then irritation, then the particular cold fury of a man who has just realized that the person he expected to fold has not folded. "Then I need you to leave," Diane said. Her voice had abandoned the careful tone entirely. "I need you to leave our home." I looked at her for a long moment. Our home. I picked up the 2 fallen cups from the patio stones and placed them neatly on the table. I took off the apron I had put on that morning when I was setting up the grill, folded it once and draped it over the back of a chair. Then I walked toward the side gate, the one I had installed myself in the summer of 2003, with hardware I had sourced from the supply house on Rosemead Boulevard, because I wanted it to last. It had lasted. Behind me, I heard Colin say something to Diane in a low voice. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. I pushed the gate open, walked through, and pulled it closed behind me. The latch caught with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I was halfway to my truck when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I didn't stop walking. I already knew I would answer it this time. Then I looked down at the screen and stopped where I stood. It was not Gerald's number. Diane had posted a photograph. I could see the notification preview from where I was standing in the street. The image showed the backyard full of smiling people, paper plates, the grill going in the background. The caption read, "Family time is everything." The timestamp showed it had been posted 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes ago, I had been standing in that same backyard with her husband's handprint on my face. I stood on the sidewalk outside the house that had my name on the deed, and I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I put the phone in my pocket, got in my truck, and drove away without looking back. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over. Not because I needed to collect myself, because I needed both hands free to make a phone call. And I was not the kind of man who drove and talked at the same time, not since Margaret had asked me to stop doing that 12 years ago, and I had agreed and kept the agreement. So I put the truck in park on a quiet stretch of Mentor Avenue 2 blocks from my own house, and I sat there for a moment with the engine running. The afternoon light had gone amber, the particular shade it gets in Pasadena in September, when the sun starts dropping behind the San Gabriel Mountains, and the whole city goes warm and gold for about 40 minutes before the dark comes in. I had always liked that light. Margaret had called it the forgiving hour because she said everything looked better in it. I did not feel particularly forgiving. I found Gerald's number and pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Calloway?" No surprise in his voice. No question either. Just my name stated as a fact. "I'm ready to talk," I said. "I thought you might be calling." A brief pause. "Are you somewhere private?" "I'm in my truck on Mentor Avenue." "That's fine." I heard the quiet sound of a chair adjusting papers being set aside. Gerald was a man who gave his full attention to one thing at a time. "Tell me what happened." I told him. I kept it short because the facts were short. Colin and I made contact. He struck me across the face. 30 witnesses. Diane asked me to apologize or leave. I left. Gerald was quiet for a moment after I finished. "I need to ask you directly," he said. "Are you injured?" "I have a bruise forming on my left cheekbone. I'm not otherwise hurt." "I want to document that for the record." "Can you take a photograph of your face and send it to my office number before the end of the evening?" "I can do that." "Good." Another pause. "Mr. Calloway, as we have discussed previously, the occupancy agreement Mrs. Calloway drafted contains what we call an immediate termination clause. Unlike a standard lease which requires formal eviction proceedings through the courts, Colin and Diane Calloway are licensees. They hold no tenancy rights. They pay no rent. They occupy that property solely at your discretion as the legal owner. Under California law, a licensee's right to occupy can be revoked at any time for any reason, and in this case the agreement specifies that revocation is automatic upon verified evidence of physical harm directed toward you. "Nathan sent you a video," I said. "He did. Approximately 40 minutes ago. The footage is clear and unambiguous." He paused again. "I want to be certain you understand what you are authorizing, Mr. Calloway. Once I dispatch my team to the property, the process will move forward. The locks will be changed. The formal notice will be served. Colin and Diane will be required to vacate and retrieve their belongings within the timeline specified in the agreement. This cannot be undone once it begins." I looked out through the windshield at the amber light on the street. I thought about the morning I had spent setting up that backyard. The tablecloths and the lemonade and the $63.40 I had paid in cash at the party store on Lake Avenue. I thought about the invitation card with 2 names on it and a blank space where a third name might have been. I thought about $830 and a camera in a living room and a text message that said, "We're a little short this month." I thought about Margaret sitting up in that hospital bed, breathing carefully, telling me that good men needed someone to build a floor under them before they fell through. She had built the floor. All I had to do was stand on it. "Gerald," I said, "start the process. Tonight." A brief silence on the line. Then he said, "Understood, Mr. Calloway. We'll be there before they return." The words were simpler than I expected. But some decisions don't need ceremony. They just need to be made. "Understood," Gerald said. "I'll have the team assembled and at the property within the hour. They will arrive before Colin and Diane return from the gathering." A brief pause. "One more thing. Nathan Calloway also included a written statement with the video. He indicated he was present for the entire incident and is willing to testify to what he witnessed if that ever becomes necessary." My chest did the thing it had done earlier, that complicated mixture of pride and something that ached. "That's his choice to make," I said. "I didn't ask him to do any of that." "I know," Gerald said. "That's what makes it mean something." We ended the call. I sat in the truck for another minute, engine still running, hands resting on the wheel. Down the street, a sprinkler system had kicked on in someone's front yard, throwing arcs of water across the lawn in long, slow sweeps. A kid on a bicycle came around the corner, stood up on the pedals to get up. The slight incline disappeared around the next block. Ordinary Saturday. Ordinary street. Ordinary life continuing in every direction around me. I put the truck in drive. I had one stop to make before I went home. I needed to photograph my face in better light, send it to Gerald's office, and then I intended to sit in my own kitchen and drink coffee and wait for whatever came next without flinching from it. I had been a contractor for 31 years. I knew how demolition worked. You identified the structure that couldn't hold weight anymore. You documented it properly, and then you brought it down cleanly so that something better could be built in its place. The amber light was fading as I pulled away from the curb. In 40 minutes, it would be fully dark across Pasadena. And somewhere on Marengo Avenue, 3 people I had never met were getting into a car to drive to a house they did not own. By the time I got home, my phone had 11 unread messages. I sat in the driveway for a moment, before going inside, looking at the screen in the fading light. Most of them were from cousins and relatives I had not spoken to privately in months. A few were from numbers I had to look at twice before I recognized them. One was from my nephew Marcus, who had not texted me directly in over a year. I read them in the order they had arrived. The first few were short. "Hope you're okay, Ray. Thinking of you. Sorry about what happened." The kind of messages people send when they want to register their presence without committing to anything specific. I had sent similar messages myself over the years. I was not going to judge anyone for them now. Then they got longer. Marcus wrote, "I should have said something. I've been sitting here thinking about it, and I just want you to know I'm sorry I didn't." Diane's cousin, the one who had handed me the invitation card, wrote, "What Colin did was wrong. I want you to know that I know that." She had added, "Please don't think we all felt the same way he does about things." I wasn't sure exactly what she meant by that last part, but I appreciated that she had written it. Aunt Sarah had not sent a text. She had called and left a voicemail. I sat in the armchair by the front window and played it. Her voice was tight and controlled, the way voices get when someone has been holding back tears for several hours and is determined not to let them fall. "Raymond," she said, "I want you to know that I spoke to Colin after you left. I told him directly what I witnessed. He told me I didn't see it right. I told him I have 2 working eyes, and I know what I saw." A pause. "I also want you to know that I should have said something the moment it happened. I didn't, and I'm not going to make excuses for why. I just want you to know I'm sorry, and that I love you, and that Margaret would have been furious with me today." The message ended. I set the phone face down on the armrest and looked at the ceiling for a while. Nathan called at 7:15. "Dad, are you home?" "I'm home." "Good." I could hear him moving, the sound of a car door closing traffic behind him. "Okay. So, I'm going to tell you what happened after you left, and I need you to just let me get through it without interrupting." "Go ahead." He took a breath. "Colin started working the crowd about 5 minutes after you walked out. He was telling people you bumped into him on purpose, that you've always had a chip on your shoulder, and this was just you looking for a reason to make a scene." Nathan's voice had an edge to it I didn't often hear. A few people just nodded. "You know how people are, they don't want the conflict." But then Aunt Sarah walked over to him and she said, and I'm quoting her here because I was standing close enough to hear it, she said, "Colin, but I have known your father for 40 years, and I have never once seen him look for a fight. What I saw today was a man who got hit and didn't hit back. And you need to think about what that says about both of you." I let out a slow breath. Colin told her she was being dramatic, Nathan continued. She told him she had seen enough and walked to her car. After that, the party just kind of... He paused. It deflated. Nobody left in a rush, but nobody was laughing either. People started saying their goodbyes around 6. By 6:30, the yard was empty. And Colin and Diane, they were loading the SUV when I left. Colin was in a good mood somehow. He was telling Diane that you'd probably call tomorrow, acting like nothing happened. Nathan's voice went flat. He said people like him never stay mad. I closed my eyes. People like him. After 68 years, after everything I had built and given and repaired and paid for without ever asking for anything, returned, that was what my son had decided I was. A category, a type, a predictable variable that could be counted on to absorb whatever was done to him and come back around in time for the next gathering. "Dad," Nathan said quietly, "Pete Garza called me about 20 minutes ago. He said there are people at the house on Marengo Avenue. A man in a suit, somebody with a toolbox. He said it looked official." "It is official," I said. A long pause on Nathan's end. "Are you okay?" I thought about the question seriously before I answered it. Was I okay? My face ached. My chest was heavy in the particular way it got when I had been carrying something for too long and had finally set it down, and the muscles didn't know yet what to do with the absence of the weight. "I think I will be," I said, "eventually." "That's good enough for now," Nathan said. After we hung up, I checked the time. 6:47. I got up and went to the bathroom mirror and looked at my face in the light. The bruise had come in fully now, a dark patch spreading from my cheekbone toward my jaw, purple at the center and yellow at the edges. I took the photograph Gerald had asked for and sent it to his office number without looking at it again. Then I went to the kitchen and put the percolator on. Outside, the neighborhood had gone fully dark. And on Marengo Avenue, if Pete Garza's account was accurate, a white sedan and an unfamiliar van were parked in front of a house where a light was still on in the front room. Colin and Diane would be home within the hour. Gerald called me at 8:14 that evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and when his name came up on the screen, I answered before the second ring finished. "It's done, Mr. Calloway," he said. "I want to walk you through what happened if you have a few minutes." "I have time," I said. "Tell me everything." He did. He was precise about it, the way he was precise about everything. And as he talked, I found myself constructing the scene in my mind, from his words, the way I used to build structures from blueprints, detail by detail, until the whole thing stood up solid in front of me. Gerald and his team had arrived at Marengo Avenue at 7:03. 3 of them in total. Gerald himself dressed in what he described simply as his work clothes, meaning the dark suit he wore to every professional engagement, regardless of the hour. A licensed courier named Thomas, who handled the formal document service carrying a sealed envelope with Colin's name on the front. And a locksmith, a man named Davis, who had worked with Gerald's firm on similar matters before with a toolbox, and 2 new lock cylinders already matched to the property. They had parked on the street and waited. Pete Garza had come to his front fence almost immediately, Gerald said, and Gerald had introduced himself briefly and explained in general terms what was taking place. Pete had nodded once, said, "About time," and gone back to his porch where he sat in his usual chair and did not go inside for the duration. Colin and Diane arrived at 7:29. Gerald said he heard the SUV before he saw it, the engine slowing as it turned onto the block. The headlights swept across the three of them standing on the front walkway. The vehicle pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment with the engine running. Then Colin got out. Gerald said he walked toward them with the particular stride of a man who has decided in advance that whatever is happening is either a mistake or someone else's problem. His hands were loose at his sides. He was still wearing the clothes from the barbecue. He stopped about 8 feet away and looked at the three of them with an expression Gerald described as impatient. "Can I help you?" Colin said. Gerald introduced himself, presented his card, said he was representing the owner of the property. Colin laughed. Gerald said it was the short, confident laugh of a man who believes he is about to demonstrate that someone has made an error. "The owner," Colin said. "I think there might be some confusion here." Diane had gotten out of the passenger side by then. She came around the front of the vehicle and stood beside her husband. She was looking at Gerald with a different expression than Colin. Gerald said. Less impatient, more careful. Like a person who has learned to read a room before committing to a position. Gerald asked them to confirm their names for the record. Colin did. Diane did. Gerald accepted the sealed envelope from Thomas and held it out to Colin. Colin took it with one hand. He looked down at the front of the envelope, and his expression shifted. Gerald said it shifted the way a confident expression shifts when it meets something it did not plan for. Colin's name was printed on the front. Below it in smaller letters, the address of the Marengo Avenue property, and below that, the name of the law firm, and below that, in clear, unambiguous text, the words, "Re-estate of Margaret Calloway. Property owner Raymond Calloway." Gerald said Colin stood there for about 4 seconds without moving. Then he tore the envelope open. He read the first page standing on the walkway with the porch light falling across the paper. Gerald watched his eyes move across the lines and stop. Move back to the top and read again. His jaw had gone tight. A muscle in his cheek was working. Diane stepped close and tried to read over his shoulder. Colin turned slightly away from her, which Gerald noted was instinctive, the movement of a man who processes bad news alone first. Then Colin turned to the page with the protection clause. Gerald said he watched Colin read that page twice, slowly, all the way through both times. When Colin looked up, his face had done something that Gerald, in 30 years of estate law, said he had seen only a handful of times. It had gone completely still, not angry, not defensive, still. The way a face goes when the mind behind it is running very fast through a very short list of options and finding none of them workable. "This is not possible," Colin said. His voice was different now, quieter and rougher at the same time. "It is fully documented," Gerald said. "The deed was recorded with the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office in November of last year. Your mother transferred ownership to your father at that time. The occupancy agreement was signed by both your parents and witnessed by 2 members of our firm." Diane had taken the papers from Colin by then. She was reading the protection clause herself, her lips moving slightly. Gerald said her face went through several things in the space of about 10 seconds. Surprise first, then calculation, then something that landed closer to fear than anything else. "We signed this," she said. Not a question, a statement. Like she was confirming something to herself that she had not thought about in a long time. "You did," Gerald said. "Both of you, in this office, 14 months ago." Colin looked at the house. Gerald said he looked at it the way a man looks at something he has just realized he never actually owned. His shoulders came down about an inch. The confidence he had carried all afternoon through the barbecue and the drive home and the walk up the driveway left his body so visibly that Gerald said he could mark almost the exact moment it went. Behind them, Davis the locksmith picked up his toolbox and walked toward the front door. Colin turned around. "What is he doing?" "Changing the locks," Gerald said, "as specified in the agreement." Colin took one step toward the door. Davis inserted the first cylinder into the lock, applied the tool, and the old hardware came free in his hands. The new cylinder went in with a series of small, deliberate clicks that carried clearly across the quiet street. Colin stopped where he stood. For the first time since he had pulled into that driveway, he had absolutely nothing to say. "Gerald told me that part last." Then he said, "It went exactly as your wife intended it to go, Mr. Calloway." I sat at my kitchen table with the cold coffee in front of me and did not say anything for a moment. "Thank you, Gerald," I finally said, "for everything." "Get some rest," he said. "I'll send the documentation to your email in the morning." I was still sitting at the kitchen table when Nathan called again. It was 8:41. I knew because I had been watching the clock on the microwave, the way you watch a clock when you are waiting for something to finish and are not entirely sure what you will feel when it does. Gerald's call had ended 19 minutes earlier. The coffee in my cup had gone completely cold, and I had not gotten up to pour a fresh one. "Dad." Nathan's voice was different from the last time. Tighter. Like something had just happened that he was still processing while he talked. "I'm outside on Marengo Avenue. I drove over after we hung up. I needed to see it." I sat up straighter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I'm in my car down the block." He exhaled. "Dad, I watched the whole thing from here. Gerald and his team, the locksmith, all of it." A pause. "Colin lost it." I waited. About 20 minutes after they served him the papers, he started making calls. I could see him from where I was parked, pacing up and down the driveway with his phone out. He called Uncle Robert first. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could see his hands. Nathan paused. His hands were doing a lot of talking. "What did Robert say?" "I don't know exactly. But whatever it was, Colin ended the call fast. Then he called Marcus." Another pause. "Marcus didn't answer. Then he called somebody else, I couldn't tell who. That one went to voicemail. Then he called Aunt Sarah." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "He put it on speaker," Nathan said. "I think he wanted Diane to hear. Or maybe he just forgot. But he had it on speaker, and Aunt Sarah's voice came out loud enough that Pete Garza, who was sitting on his porch about 30 feet away, turned his head." "What did she say?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, I could hear something in his voice that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. "She said, 'Colin, I watched you strike your father in front of 30 people this afternoon. I watched your wife tell him to apologize or leave. And now you're calling me to do what exactly? To tell a lawyer that it didn't happen." A pause. Then she said, "I have been quiet in this family for too long, about too many things. I am not going to be quiet about this one." And then she hung up. I pressed 2 fingers against my mouth and looked at the ceiling. Colin stood in the driveway for about 10 seconds after that. Nathan continued, just standing there with the phone at his side. Pete Garza was watching him from the porch. Neither of them said anything. Nathan paused. Then Colin turned around and threw his phone into the passenger seat of the SUV. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough that Diane flinched. I thought about Diane flinching. I thought about what it meant that she had married a man whose anger she had learned to read that precisely. After that, they went inside to pack some things, Nathan said. Gerald's team waited on the walkway. The locksmith stayed by the door. He took a breath. It took them about 40 minutes. They came out with 2 suitcases and some bags. Diane was carrying Jordan's backpack. His voice caught slightly on that last part. The little dinosaur one he takes everywhere. I closed my eyes. Jordan's backpack. The green one with the diplodocus on the front that I had bought him for his 4th birthday, because he had spent 20 minutes in the store telling me the difference between a diplodocus and a brachiosaurus, with the absolute authority of a child who has recently acquired information he considers essential. I had listened to every word of it. I had bought the backpack and let him carry it out of the store himself. They drove away at 9:12, Nathan said quietly. Colin didn't look back at the house. Diane did. Once, just before she got in. We were both quiet for a moment. Outside my kitchen window, the neighborhood was dark and still. "There's one more thing," Nathan said. "About 15 minutes after they left, you got a voicemail. Gerald forwarded it to me because it came through the property line. It was from Diane." "What did she say?" Nathan read it to me from his phone. Diane's voice, he said, was soft and careful and very controlled. She said she was sorry for everything that had happened. She said she wanted Raymond to know that she had never meant for things to go this far. She said there were some papers in the study in the filing cabinet behind the desk that belonged to Colin's business, and she would really appreciate it if Raymond could leave them somewhere accessible, because Colin needed them urgently, and they were time-sensitive. I sat with that for a moment. Not an apology. An errand. The words had been arranged to sound like remorse, but the request at the center of them was as calculated as everything else Diane had ever done. She needed something from inside the house, and she had wrapped the need in the language of regret, because that was the tool she had available. "Dad," Nathan said. "Forward it to Gerald," I said. "Don't respond to it, and don't let me respond to it either. Gerald will know what to do with it." "Already sent it," Nathan said. I figured. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 9:47. The house around me was quiet in the way small houses are quiet late at night, the particular settled stillness of walls and floors that have absorbed a full day and gone to rest. Then my phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number. I let it ring through to voicemail. I did not listen to it that night. I would find out 3 days later who it was and what they wanted. But that was still ahead of me, and I did not know it yet. I got up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep before the hour changed. The 3 days after were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Quiet is not the same thing as peaceful. Peaceful is what you feel when a situation has resolved itself cleanly and the people involved have found their way to something better. Quiet is what you get when the noise stops, but the weight of everything that caused the noise is still sitting on the kitchen table, and you walk around it carefully because you are not ready yet to pick it up and decide what to do with it. I went about my days. I watered the geraniums on the front porch. I drove to the hardware store on Colorado Boulevard and bought a new set of drill bits I had been meaning to replace for months. I called my doctor's office and made an appointment to have the bruise on my cheek formally documented, which Gerald had recommended in a follow-up email Monday morning. The bruise had gone from purple to a deep greenish yellow by Tuesday, the kind of coloring that made the woman at the pharmacy counter shuma to me, and then look away again with the particular careful courtesy of someone who has decided it is not their business. Nathan came over Monday morning the way I had asked him to. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table and did not talk about the weekend directly for the first 20 minutes. We talked about his students. He taught 7th grade English at a school in Arcadia, and about a book he had been reading, and about whether the roses along the back fence at Marengo Avenue were going to need attention before the season changed. Ordinary conversation. The kind that two people who know each other well use to take the temperature of a room before they walk all the way into it. Eventually, Nathan set his cup down and said, "Gerald called me this morning." What did he say? He said the documentation is complete. The notice of termination has been formally served. Colin and Diane have 30 days to retrieve the remainder of their belongings under supervised conditions. He paused. He also said the voicemail from Diane has been logged as part of the record. He said it was, quote, instructive. I nodded. Dad. Nathan leaned forward slightly. Are you going to be okay? Not about the house, about Colin. I looked at my coffee cup. I don't know yet, I said. Ask me in a few months. He accepted that. He was good at accepting incomplete answers without pushing for the rest. Margaret had been the same way. It was one of the things I had always been grateful for in both of them. The days passed. Wednesday evening, I was sitting in the armchair by the front window reading something I had not done in the evening in longer than I could easily recall when my phone buzzed on the side table. Unknown number. The same one from Sunday night. I answered it this time. Ray. Diane's voice. Not the careful, managed tone from the barbecue. Not the soft, calculated performance of the voicemail. Something rawer and less rehearsed, the voice of a person who has been running on adrenaline for 3 days and has just run out of it. I need you to listen to me. I'm listening, I said. This has gone far enough. What you did was cruel and you know it. We have a child. We have Jordan. You put your grandson out on the street over a misunderstanding, and I want you to think about what that says about the kind of man you are. I did not say anything. I reached over and pressed the speaker button on my phone and set it on the armrest because Nathan was sitting 6 feet away in the kitchen doorway, a cup of coffee in both hands, and he had heard her voice through the phone and had gone very still. Diane continued. I have been patient with you, Ray. I have been patient for years. But I want you to understand something. If you think I'm going to let this stand, you're wrong. I will tell every person in that family exactly what kind of father you were to Colin. I will tell them about the years he went without because you were too proud to help when it mattered. I'll tell them. Diane, I said, quietly. She stopped. I paid $6,400 of my retirement savings to keep your utilities running 3 years ago, I said. I have the wire transfer records. Gerald has copies. I paused. I also spent 11 months in your home caring for your son while you installed cameras in the living room to look for reasons to use against me. I know about the cameras, Diane. I have known for a while. The line went very quiet. Nathan was looking at me from the kitchen doorway. His knuckles had gone white around his coffee cup. His jaw was set in a way that reminded me of his mother when she had heard something that required a response and was deciding very carefully what that response would be. That is not... Diane started. I want you to hear me clearly, I said. I have no interest in continuing this conversation. What I am going to do is end this call, and then I am going to forward the recording to Gerald Vance's office the same way I forwarded your voicemail. After that, I am going to go back to reading my book. A long pause. When Diane spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Flat and cold, the performance entirely gone. You think you've won something, she said. You haven't. I don't think I've won anything, I said. I think I've stopped losing. There's a difference. I ended the call. Nathan set his coffee cup down on the kitchen counter with a small, careful click. He walked over to the armchair and crouched down in front of me, which he had not done since he was about 9 years old, and trying to tell me something he wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Dad, he said. His voice was rough. I didn't know about the cameras. I know you didn't. I should have. Nathan. I put my hand on his shoulder. You filmed your brother hitting your father and sent the evidence to a lawyer without being asked. You showed up on a street in the dark to make sure things went the way they were supposed to go. You have been sitting in my kitchen for 3 days, making sure I eat something. I looked at him. You've done enough. You've done more than enough. He pressed his mouth together and looked at the floor for a moment. His shoulders were shaking slightly, the contained trembling of a man who has been holding himself together for 72 hours and has just been given permission to stop. Then he looked up and said, Father Dennis called again today. He said whenever you're ready. I nodded slowly. I looked out the dark window at the quiet street and thought about Margaret and the things she had prepared for me that I had not known I would need. I'll call him in the morning, I said. Pete Garza came over on a Thursday morning with a bag of tomatoes from his garden. That was how Pete operated. He did not call ahead. He did not send a text. He showed up at your door with something from his yard. And if you were home, you let him in. And if you were not, he left it on the porch with a note written on whatever was in his shirt pocket, usually a gas station receipt or the back of an envelope. I had known him for over 20 years, and I could not recall a single occasion on which he had arrived empty-handed. I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table the way 2 men in their 70s sit at a kitchen table on a Thursday morning when there is no particular urgency anywhere and the day is just the day. He had watched the whole thing from his porch on the night it happened, he told me. The suit, the locksmith, the papers. He had watched Colin and Diane load their bags into the SUV and drive away. He had watched the locksmith do a final check of the front door and the side gate before getting into his van and leaving. He had sat on that porch until every car was gone, and the street was quiet, and the light in the front room of the house on Marengo Avenue had been turned off by someone from Gerald's team on their way out. I've been watching that house for 22 years, Ray, Pete said. He wrapped both hands around his mug the way he always did regardless of the temperature outside. I watched you build that back fence. I watched Margaret plant those roses. I watched you fix the porch railing twice because you kept finding better ways to do it. He paused. I watched a lot of things happen over there in the last 3 years that I should have said something about and didn't. Pete, I started. Let me finish. He looked at his mug. I watched Colin talk to you like you were the help. I watched Diane walk past you at your own family gatherings without saying good morning. I watched you show up with bags of groceries and leave without anybody thanking you more times than I want to count. He shook his head slowly. I told myself it wasn't my business. That's the thing people tell themselves, Ray. It isn't my business. But when a man gets hit in his own backyard and nobody says a word, it becomes everybody's business, whether we like it or not. I looked at the tomatoes he had brought sitting in a paper bag on the counter. They were the kind he grew every summer along his south fence, deep red, slightly irregular, the kind that tasted like actual tomatoes instead of the pale approximations you found at the grocery store. The morning after, Pete continued, I was out early and I saw the lights on in the house. Gerald's people, I figured, making sure everything was in order. He nodded to himself. Then around 11, Colin came back with a pickup truck. One of those rental ones. He had a young guy with him, somebody I didn't recognize. They went in and started carrying things out. Gerald arranged supervised access, I said. I know. There was a woman there from Gerald's office the whole time sitting in a car out front with a clipboard. Pete picked up his mug. They worked for about 4 hours. Back and forth boxes and furniture and bags. The young guy did most of the carrying. Colin mostly directed. He paused. Diane wasn't there. Just Colin. I thought about that. Colin alone loading boxes into a rented truck on a Tuesday morning, while a woman with a clipboard sat outside to make sure he only took what was his. Before he left, Pete said he stood in the driveway for a bit, maybe 5 minutes. Just stood there looking at the house. He set down his mug carefully. I was trimming the hedge, probably closer to him than he realized. He didn't say anything to me and I didn't say anything to him, but I could see his face, Ray. I waited. He looked like a man who had just understood something too late, Pete said quietly. Not sorry exactly. Not yet, but starting to understand the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually ended up. Pete looked at me across the table. You know that look. You've been in construction long enough. It's the look a man gets when he's looking at a crack in a foundation he was sure was solid. I knew exactly that look. Then he got in the truck, Pete said, and he drove away, and he did not look back at the house. Not once. We sat with that for a moment. Outside, a mockingbird had started up in the liquid amber tree at the edge of my yard, running through its repertoire with the particular confidence of a bird that knows it has an audience even when it doesn't. How are you doing, Ray? Pete asked. Not the polite version of the question. The real one. I considered it seriously. Better than I was last week, I said. Not as good as I'll be next month. Pete nodded like that was the most reasonable thing he had heard in a while. He picked up his mug. Margaret would have handled all of this very differently, he said. She would have seen it coming about 2 years earlier and done something about it before it got to where it got. She did see it coming, I said. She just handled it in her own way. Pete looked at me for a moment. Then he smiled, small and certain, the smile of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected. Good for her, he said. We finished our coffee. Pete took his mug to the sink and rinsed it the way he always did without being asked. He picked up his bag and put his jacket on, and we walked to the front door together. On the porch, he stopped and looked down the street toward Marengo Avenue. From where we stood, you couldn't see the house itself, just the top of the liquid amber tree in the front yard and the edge of the roofline. Those roses Margaret planted along the back fence are going to need cutting back before winter, he said. I know, I said. I'll get to them. He nodded once and went down the porch steps and back toward his house. I stood in the doorway and watched him go, a 71-year-old man, in no particular hurry, carrying his empty bag back to his garden. The phone rang before I had closed the door. Father Dennis Corley. Raymond, he said. His voice was warm and unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent 50 years listening to people tell him the hardest things they knew how to say. I think it's time. Can you come by the church? I looked down the street one more time. The top of the liquid amber tree was catching the morning light. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Father, I said. St. Andrew's was 12 minutes from my house on a quiet morning. I had driven that route so many times over the past 30 years that my hands knew it without my mind having to think about it. Left on Colorado, right on El Molino, the parking lot behind the church, where the old eucalyptus tree dropped its bark in long, curling strips every summer, and Margaret used to pick them up and smell them before dropping them again, because she said they smelled like something she couldn't name but recognized. I parked in the same spot we always used, second row from the back left side. Old habit. The church was nearly empty at that hour. An elderly man I didn't recognize was sitting in a pew near the back with his head bowed. The light inside was the particular quality of light that old buildings hold, filtered and dense, coming through the stained glass on the south wall, in long colored bars that moved imperceptibly across the stone floor as the morning progressed. Margaret and I had always sat in the fourth row left side. I did not sit there today. I stood in the aisle for a moment and looked at that pew, and then I kept walking toward the back of the church where Father Dennis had his small office behind the sacristy. He was standing in the doorway when I arrived, as though he had heard my footsteps from the moment I entered the building. He was 70 years old, and he had the particular stillness of a man who had spent 5 decades learning to be present in difficult rooms without filling them with himself. He shook my hand with both of his and did not comment on the fading bruise on my cheekbone, which I appreciated. "Come in, Raymond," he said. His office was small and warm bookshelves on 3 walls, a desk that had clearly been there longer than the current century, 2 chairs, positioned across from each other, without the desk between them. He had done that deliberately, I understood. He was not receiving me as a priest behind a desk. He was sitting with me as a person. He reached into the top drawer and removed a cream envelope letter-sized, sealed. My name was written on the front in Margaret's handwriting. I knew her handwriting the way I knew the sound of her voice. The particular way she made the capital R slightly larger than necessary, the Y at the end dipping below the line with a small, decisive curl. I had seen that handwriting on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the notes she used to leave on my workbench when she wanted to tell me something without interrupting whatever I was doing. I held the envelope for a moment without opening it. She brought it to me in November. Father Dennis said quietly. About 2 weeks before she passed. She told me she had written it some months earlier and had been deciding when to have it delivered. He paused. She said she would know when the time was right, and that if she was no longer able to judge, she trusted me to know instead. I looked at the envelope. She also told me something else, Father Dennis said. She told me that you were the best man she had ever known, and that she was sorry she couldn't stay longer, and that she had done everything she could think of to make sure you would be all right without her. His voice was steady and unhurried. She said she knew you would try to carry everything yourself, and that she had tried to build something that would carry some of it for you. I pressed my thumb along the sealed edge of the envelope. Father Dennis stood up. "I'll give you some time," he said. "There's coffee on the table outside if you want it." He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, as he passed the way a man does, when words would be too much, and then he was gone and the door was not quite closed behind him, and I was alone in that small, warm room with my wife's handwriting in my hands. I opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, written on the same cream paper she used for everything important. Her handwriting was slightly less steady than usual, in places the letters a little larger, which told me she had written it when her hands were already giving her trouble. She had written it anyway. She began by telling me about the house. She wrote that she had thought about what to do with it for a long time longer than I knew, and that her decision had not been made out of anger toward Colin, but out of clarity about what he had become and what he was likely to do if nothing changed. She wrote that she had watched me absorb his behavior for years and say nothing because I loved him, and because I believed the way good fathers believe that the boy she had raised was still somewhere inside the man he had turned into. She wrote that she believed it too, and that she hoped she was right, and that the agreement she had put in place was not a punishment, but a door. If Colin had chosen to walk through it differently, the house would still be theirs to live in. The choice had always been his. Then she wrote about me. She wrote that she had been watching me her entire life, or the part of it that mattered, and that what she had seen was a man who gave everything he had to the people around him and asked for very little in return, and that this was both his greatest strength and the thing that had made it possible for people to take from him without consequence for too long. She wrote that she was not sorry for the life they had built together, not for a single day of it. She wrote that the roses along the back fence needed cutting back before winter. And then at the bottom of the second page in handwriting that was steadier than the rest, as though she had saved her strength for this part, she wrote the last thing. "I have watched you hold this family together with your bare hands for 40 years, Ray. I have watched you give and give again. I know you will find a way to forgive Colin too in time, because that is the kind of man you are, and I would not change it. So I made sure the house would protect you even when your heart couldn't. That is all I've done. The rest is yours. I love you. I have always loved you. Take care of the roses. I sat in that chair for a long time after I finished reading. The colored light from the south windows had moved several inches across the floor by the time I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. My hands were not entirely steady. I did not try to make them steady. I just let them be what they were. When I came out of the office, Father Dennis was sitting in the hall with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without asking whether I wanted it. I sat down beside him, and we drank our coffee without talking 2 old men in a quiet church on a Thursday morning, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Gerald had sent the new keys by courier the week after everything happened. They arrived in a small padded envelope with a typed note explaining which key corresponded to which lock: front door, side gate, back door, the small padlock on the storage shed that I had installed myself in 2007, using hardware I had sourced from a supplier in Burbank because I wanted the kind that would last. 3 keys on a plain steel ring, no keychain, no decoration, just the keys. I had put the envelope on my kitchen counter and left it there for 3 weeks. I drove to Marengo Avenue on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the light in Pasadena has that particular quality it gets in autumn, cooler than September, but still clear, the San Gabriel Mountains visible from almost every east-facing street, with the kind of definition you only get after the first rains have cleared the air. I parked in the driveway, the spot I had always used before Colin decided it was his spot, and I sat in the truck for a few minutes before I got out. The house looked the same from the outside. That was the first thing I noticed. Whatever had happened inside those walls over the past 3 years, the outside had not changed in any way I could see. The porch railing I had replaced in 2019 was still solid. The paint on the trim was the color Margaret and I had chosen together from a fan of samples spread across the kitchen table. One Saturday afternoon, a warm white she called honest, because she said it didn't try to be anything it wasn't. The rose bushes along the front fence had grown out past where they should have been, reaching through the slats toward the sidewalk. But that was a matter of an hour with the pruning shears, and not a problem yet. I got out of the truck and stood in the driveway. Pete Garza appeared at his fence within about 45 seconds, which told me he had been watching for my truck. He didn't say anything. He just raised one hand, and I raised mine back, and that was sufficient. He stayed at his fence while I walked up the front path, which was something I appreciated. He was there if I needed him, and somewhere else if I didn't. The new key turned smoothly. Davis had done good work. I pushed the front door open and stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. The house smelled different. Not bad. Not wrong exactly. Just different. It smelled like other people's cleaning products, and a candle that had been burned a lot in one particular place, and something underneath that I couldn't identify for a moment, and then did. New carpet. They had replaced the carpet in the living room. The original carpet, the one Margaret and I had chosen in 2004, a neutral low pile that she had picked, and because she said it would still look reasonable in 20 years, and she had been correct, was gone. In its place was something darker, a charcoal gray, newer and thicker and completely unfamiliar to me. I stood in the living room and looked at the floor. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. I was something more complicated than angry, something that didn't have a clean name. The feeling of walking into a room that was yours and finding it rearranged by someone who had not asked and would not have understood why asking mattered. I walked through the living room into the kitchen. The kitchen was mostly unchanged, which surprised me. The same cabinets, the same countertops Margaret had chosen when we remodeled in 2011, white tile with a small gray vein running through it that she had fallen in love with at a showroom on Foothill Boulevard. Someone had added a small appliance caddy on the counter near the microwave that I didn't recognize, and a magnetic knife strip on the wall that I had not put there, but otherwise it was the room I remembered. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter the way I always had, checking the caulk line at the backsplash. Still solid. I had done that job myself, and I had done it right. Down the hall, I passed Nathan's old room, which Colin and Diane had been using as a home office. The desk was gone, obviously, along with the equipment and the filing cabinet where Diane had told the voicemail the business documents were stored. The room was empty now, just the closet and the baseboards and the window looking out onto the side yard where the old Meyer lemon tree was still doing what it had always done, producing more lemons than any two people could use. Then I reached the door at the end of the hall, our bedroom. The room where Margaret and I had slept for 22 years. The room where she had read in bed every night with the lamp on her side because she could not fall asleep without reading first. The room where she had kept her jewelry box on the dresser with the slightly stiff top drawer that I had been meaning to fix since 2016. The room where in the last weeks before we moved out to give Colin and Diane more space, she had stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at it before she turned off the light. I opened the door. The walls were gray, not charcoal like this carpet in the living room. A cooler gray, almost blue in the morning light, the kind of color that interior design magazines probably had a name for, but that I would have called the color of an overcast day. Every surface had been painted. The trim, which I had carefully cut in with a 2-inch brush over the course of a very long weekend in 2003, because Margaret wanted it done right, and I wanted to give her what she wanted, was the same cool gray. The room had been transformed into something that could have been in any house on any street, something without memory, without accumulation, without the particular density that rooms develop when people who love each other inhabit them long enough. The dresser was gone. The lamp from Margaret's side was gone. The curtains she had made herself from fabric she found at a shop on Colorado Boulevard because she couldn't find exactly what she wanted. Ready-made were gone, replaced by standard white blinds. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Then I went to the closet and opened it, and it was empty too, just the rod and the shelf above it, and the faint rectangular shadow on the wall, where a mirror had been hung and removed. I went downstairs to the storage area beneath the house. Margaret had called it the dungeon, which was her affectionate name for any space that didn't have enough natural light. It was a partial basement, more of a large crawl space that I had finished with plywood walls and a concrete floor sometime in the 90s, where we kept seasonal things and tools and the boxes that never quite got unpacked from one house to another and eventually become part of the furniture of a life without anyone deciding they should. I found the mirror behind a stack of cardboard boxes near the water heater. It was wrapped loosely in a moving blanket, the kind you rent with a truck, which told me whoever had put it there had not wanted it broken, but also had not thought carefully about where it was going. I moved the boxes aside and pulled the blanket back. It was Margaret's mirror, the one that had hung on the wall of our bedroom for as long as I could remember, an oval frame of dark wood that she had found at an estate sale in San Marino in the late 90s for $30 and carried to the car herself because she didn't trust anyone else to hold it correctly. It was not a valuable piece by any standard anyone would apply to such things. It was valuable because she had carried it herself and because it had been on our wall for 25 years, and because every morning she had stood in front of it and I had stood slightly behind her, and we had looked at each other in it without thinking about it, the way you look at things that have always been there. I carried it upstairs carefully, both hands the way she would have wanted. I brought it to the bedroom and held it against the wall where it had always hung, at the height where it had always been, and I looked at what I saw in it. An old man with a fading bruise on his cheekbone and gray at his temples, and the hands of someone who had spent his life building things. standing in a room that needed work, in a house that had his name on it. I held the mirror there for a long moment. Then I went to the truck and got my toolbox. I had work to do. My phone buzzed as I was coming back up the front path. Nathan. "Dad, are you at the house?" "I am," I said. "How is it?" I looked up at the front of the house in the October morning light. The honest white paint, the porch railing I had replaced, the roses along the front fence pushing through toward the sidewalk. "It needs some attention," I said, "but the bones are good." A pause. Then Nathan said, "Jordan keeps asking about you. He wants to know if he can come see the backyard. He says he remembers the tomatoes you used to grow back there." I had not grown tomatoes in that backyard for 3 years. "Tell him the backyard is going to need about 3 more weeks," I said. "But after that, I'd like him to come over. Tell him I have something to show him." "What are you going to show him?" I looked at the roses. "How to prune," I said. "I bought the groceries myself, not because anyone asked me to, because I wanted to." There is a difference, and I had learned in the past month to pay attention to that difference in everything I did, the things I chose, and the things I did out of habit, and the things I did because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. This was something I chose. I drove to the market on Fair Oaks Avenue early on a Saturday morning in the 3rd week of October, and I bought chicken and corn and the good rolls from the bakery section, and 2 kinds of lemonade and a bag of ice, and I carried it all to the truck myself and drove to Marengo Avenue and started the grill before anyone arrived. The roses along the back fence were blooming again. I had spent 2 evenings the week before cutting them back the way they needed, clearing the dead canes and opening up the center for light and air. Pete Garza had leaned over the fence and supervised without being asked which was his version of helping, and I had accepted it in the spirit it was offered. The roses had responded the way roses respond to honest attention. New growth at the tips. Color coming back. Margaret would have been pleased. The first to arrive was Father Dennis, which did not surprise me. He was punctual the way clergy often are, as though time were a form of respect. He came through the side gate carrying a small ceramic dish covered in foil, and said it was something he had made that morning, and when I lifted the foil it turned out to be a bread pudding, which had been Margaret's favorite, and which he made every year for the church's fall social. I did not say anything about that. I just put it on the table and thanked him, and he nodded, like that was all that needed to happen. Pete came next over the fence rather than through the gate because that was how Pete had always arrived, and I saw no reason to change it now. He had brought tomatoes again, a full bag this time, and he set them on the table without ceremony, and picked up a pair of tongs and took over the grill without asking, which was also how Pete operated, and which I also accepted without argument. Melissa Tanner arrived a few minutes after that. I had known Melissa for over 20 years since she came to work in the accounting office of my contracting company in the early 2000s, and proved within about 3 weeks that she knew more about running a small business than I did. She was 55 now, still sharp in exactly the same way she had always been sharp, the kind of woman who noticed everything and commented on about a third of it and kept the rest filed away for when it became relevant. She brought a bottle of sparkling water and 2 lemons and told me I looked better than she had expected, which from Melissa was a considerable compliment. Aunt Sarah came with the covered dish of potato salad and hugged me longer than I expected and did not say anything for a moment, after just held on, and that was the right thing to do, and she knew it. Then Nathan arrived. He came through the gate with Jordan on his shoulders, which was how he always carried him when Jordan wanted to be taller than everything else in the yard. Jordan was 6 years old and wearing a shirt with a stegosaurus on it, and when Nathan ducked through the gate and Jordan had to hold on to the top of the frame to keep from hitting his head, the boy laughed so hard he nearly fell off. I crossed the yard to meet them. Nathan lowered Jordan to the ground, and Jordan looked up at me with the absolute directness that 6-year-olds bring to every interaction. No warm-up, no preamble, just the thing itself. "Grandpa," he said, "Uncle Nathan said you're going to teach me how to cut the plants." "The roses," I said. "Yes, we'll do that after lunch." He considered this. "Do roses have thorns?" "They do." "Will I get poked?" "Probably once or twice," I said. "That's how you learn where they are." He thought about this with the seriousness of someone encountering a new rule about the world. Then he nodded like he had decided it was acceptable and went directly to the table to investigate what was on it. Nathan watched him go and then looked at me. He had the same look he had been giving me for the past month, the one that was half checking and half something he hadn't found the right word for yet. I put my hand briefly on his shoulder, and he nodded, and that was enough. The afternoon went the way good afternoons go. Easy and unplanned, moving from one thing to the next without anyone directing it. Pete held court at the grill. Father Dennis and Aunt Sarah found each other immediately and settled into a conversation in the corner of the yard that appeared to be going well. Melissa sat with Nathan and asked him questions about his students, with the genuine interest of a woman who had always found other people's work more interesting than most people did. Jordan ate half a chicken leg and declared the rolls excellent, and then went to examine the roses along the back fence with the focused attention of someone who has been told there are thorns and wants to know exactly where they are before committing to anything. I watched him crouch down by the base of the rose canes, his small hands hovering just above the stems without touching, and something happened in my chest that I did not try to name. After lunch, I took him to the roses properly. I showed him how to look for the dead wood, how to follow a cane from the tip back until you found the swelling of a bud eye pointing outward, how to make the cut at an angle so water ran off rather than pooling and causing rot. He listened with the total attention children bring to practical things, the same way he had once listened to me stack wooden blocks in the living room of this house when he was less than a year old. He got poked twice. Both times he looked at his finger with curiosity rather than distress, the way a small scientist notes a result. Late in the afternoon, when Pete was wrapping the leftover rolls in foil, and Father Dennis was helping Aunt Sarah stack the folding chairs, and Melissa and Nathan were finishing the last of the lemonade, Jordan came and stood beside me at the edge of the porch. He looked up. "Grandpa." "Yes. Why did Mommy say you were mean?" His voice was straightforward, no weight in it, just the question. "Because you're the nicest person I know." The yard went quiet in the way yards do when something true has been said, without anyone planning it. Nathan turned his head toward the fence. Aunt Sarah set down the chair she was holding. Pete stood at the table with the foil in his hands and looked at the roses. I crouched down so I was at Jordan's level. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "people say things when they're upset that don't match what's true. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they were having a hard time." Jordan processed this. "Are you having a hard time?" "Not right now," I said. "Right now I'm doing pretty well." He looked at me for a moment, with those clear 6-year-old eyes that have not yet learned to look at anything except exactly what is there. Then he put his arms around my neck, and I held on to him, and the yard stayed quiet for a few seconds, in the good way, the way that means everyone in it is exactly where they should be. Before the afternoon ended, I told Nathan I had spoken with Gerald that week. I told him I had signed the paperwork updating my will. The house would go to Nathan and a portion to a building trades scholarship fund I had discussed with Gerald in Margaret's name. Nathan started to say something, and I told him we did not need to discuss it further, and he accepted that the way he accepted most things, I said, with a firmness he recognized as final. The sun dropped behind the San Gabriel Mountains at 5:37. and the backyard went into the soft shade that follows it. Everything still warm, but the edge of the light gone, the roses along the fence turning from red to something darker and richer in the changed quality of the air. Father Dennis found me on the porch as the guests were leaving. "How are you, Raymond?" he asked. The real question, the way Pete had asked it, the way people who know you ask it. I thought about everything that the past month had contained. The bruise that had faded, the letter I kept in the drawer of my nightstand, the mirror back on its wall, the roses blooming again along the back fence, Jordan's arms around my neck. "I think Margaret would say I'm right where she intended me to be," I said. Father Dennis smiled. Not the professional warmth of a man in his role. The real thing. "I think she would," he said. After everyone had gone, I sat on the back porch alone for a while. The yard was quiet, the good kind, the kind that comes after people you love have been in a space and left some of their warmth behind in it. The roses were dark shapes along the fence in the fading light. The smell of the grill was still in the air. I had built a lot of things in my life. Houses and fences and porches that were still standing. A marriage that had lasted 41 years. A younger son who drove across town in the dark to make sure things went right. A grandson who asked honest questions and learned where the thorns were without being afraid of them. I had not built all of those things alone. Margaret had built half of everything I called mine, sometimes more than half, and she had done it in ways I was still discovering. I thought I would probably keep discovering them for the rest of my life. Small things she had arranged and put in place and trusted time to reveal. I could live with that. More than that. I was grateful for it. I spent 68 years believing that love meant showing up without being asked and giving without keeping score. I was not wrong about that. But I was wrong about one thing. Giving without limits is not generosity. It is an invitation for people to stop seeing you entirely. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, not as me, but as the person who stayed silent one too many times, do not wait until someone builds a floor beneath you before you stand up. Build it yourself. You deserve that much. I believe God does not place us in difficult families by accident. He places us there to find out what we are made of. I found out later than I should have. But I found out. This is a grandpa story about one family, one house, and one decision made too late by the wrong people. But grandpa stories like this one happen in every town, in every family, every single day. And every family story deserves to be told honestly. If this family story reached something in you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more grandpa stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe to this channel. We will be here. Thank you for staying until the end. A note. Before we continue, some stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely for reflection and understanding. If that is not the content you are looking for, we respect that completely. Please feel free to find what serves you best elsewhere.